Hello coders. So in today's video, we'll learn how to declare and use variables and constants in Go. Variables are one of the most important building blocks of any Go program, not just Go program, any program. So we learn what are variables in Go, what are the different data types in Go, what exactly is a data type, what is a constant, what are some of the naming conventions that we follow while declaring variables, and some things like that. So let's get started. So this is the editor from yesterday that I have. You can see the hello.go is already there. I'll create a new file called variable.go. And so let's begin. As I mentioned in my previous video, you will always have to declare a package name for all of your Go files. So the package will be main, and then we have our function, the main entry point, that is your main function. Function main. What exactly is a function? I'll be covering that in a later video. But for now, we'll just focus on variables and constants. Now, when I have my function, okay, let me import the formatting library as well. Import FMT. Now, FMT will be used to print some variables out to the standard output so that we can see what exactly these variables are and how they work. Now, for a basic variable declaration, what you need is a var keyword. So var is a keyword in Go that instructs your compiler that you are going to define a variable here. Now, var is the instruction, it's a keyword. Now the syntax is you have to define your variable name. So for now, I'll just give it as name. This can be anything, X, Y, Z. It should it should be alphanumeric basically. Where name equal to, let's say, John. Now in this case, we are declaring a variable called name, which has a value of John, which is of type string. Now, what do I mean by type string? Type string means the type of data. So this is the data John that you have here. The type of data is a mix of characters or alphabets. So anything that is not a number is basically a character. Now, so where name equal to John. In this, the type of name is string. Why? Because it is not a number, it is a mix of characters. So where name string equal to John. Here the string that you're mentioning that the name variable will have is optional. Go by default inherits, sorry, it there is something called as type inference. So the name, even if you don't specify its data type, will infer that the type of data is string. So even if you write var name equal to John or var name string equal to John, both are valid statements. It is advised that you always give the type so that it's better for readability, so that if someone else is looking at your code, they easily understand what the type of that variable is and what you're assigning that value to. Okay. Now this is so you know what a basic variable is. Now this I am trying to assign a string variable. Now let's see I want to create a variable which holds a number. For example, I have name. Let's see if I can get a variable named age, which is of type int. As I mentioned earlier, the type is optional, but for brevity, we always give the type age int equal to 25. Okay, and this was an integer variable. Now let's say I want to try something like a Boolean variable, where is student maybe. Sorry, yeah, you might have just noticed that I was trying to type in capital and I renamed it to small. That's because this was the naming convention that I was talking about earlier. Variables are always supposed to be in lowercase alphabets. The reason is uppercase variables have a different meaning in Go. That we'll get to it later. But for now, the main point is in a function, especially inside a function, you should always name your variables in lowercase alphabets. So that's That's one of the programming guidelines. And where student bool. Bool is a data type which specifies either it's a true or a false event. So this, for example, I can give it true. And then there's something like float equal to 95.5. So the difference between int and float is that a floating point variable can have decimals, unlike integers. And then there is rune, for example, initial rune equal to. Runes are always enclosed in single quotes and it can hold only one single character. So for me, let's say I'll take it as J. And for strings, strings are always enclosed in double quotes. And where room. So these are some of the basic data types that are supported in Go. There are other derived data types as well, something called as arrays, slices, structs, maps. So these are some of the other data types that are supported by Go. We'll be looking at them later in detail in some of the upcoming videos, right? So this is, yeah, these are, as I mentioned, these are the basic data types. Now let's see how we can group them. If you see, we are declaring, I'll remove this. Yeah. So this is one of the rules. You cannot redefine a variable. So you are declaring var name equal to John here. That means in the entire scope of this function, the scope is basically your lifetime of a variable. Let's assume for now var name equal to John. Yeah. So var name equal to John and var name string equal to John, they are conflicting statements because to the compiler, we are instructing twice saying that there is a variable called name. So the compiler will throw an error saying that you're declaring name twice. So you can get rid of either one of them. For now, I'll get rid of this. Now, in each line, we are declaring a new variable using the keyword var. Now, if I wanted to clean this up, there is a grouping technology or terminology or a technique, I would say, in Go, where we can group variable declaration using a parenthesis. So this bracket type of bracket is called parentheses. And then where I can name it like John. And the same things, age equal to 25, then student equal to true, then mark, okay, I'll name it marks equal to 95.5 and initial equal to J. As I mentioned earlier, again, this is a redeclaration of the same variable, so this is not valid. So for now, I will comment it out. Comments are part of code that are not executed by the compiler, they are ignored by the compiler. They are actually not ignored, they are used in something else. I'll cover that in a later video. But for now, you can think of comments like code chunks or part of code that are ignored by the compiler. Okay. Now let's say I print all of these, right? So to print in Go, what do we do? fmt dot print line, then parentheses, and whatever you want to print. So for now, I'll print name, age, student, then marks, and then initial. Okay. How do I run the program? Go run and the file name variable dot go. Yeah, you see name is printed. All the values are printed. You see. And there is one more thing that you might have noticed here, that when you're trying to print the initial J, it is not being printed as J, it is being printed as 74. Now, why this happened? Basically, whenever you're trying to execute a print statement, what Go compiler does is whatever value you pass inside it, it tries to convert it to a string. Now, the type of this is already string. So as I mentioned, string, this is int. Since since it is string, there is no change here. Integers are also by default converted to string in a similar fashion. It is same for float and bool as well. But what happens to this character is it is actually converted to its ASCII code. Now, what is an ASCII code? ASCII code is a representation of numbers or your characters in the ASCII format. ASCII is a format, well-known format. You guys can maybe Google it. ASCII is a well-known format for representing different characters or numbers in any programming language. So for alphabets, there is a range. So smaller case alphabets, that is small a to z, start from 97 to the z plus, that is plus 25. And then for capital letters, it is a to z, it starts from 65 and so on. So that's the reason j is represented as 74. Now let's say you wanted to print j as it is. Then what do we have to do is we have to use something known as string formatters in Go. Now how to use that is we can use fmt.printf. Now printf is similar to println, but the difference is that println stands for print line and printf is print formatted. Now what does formatting mean? Now formatting in Go means we are going to specify how the string is going to be formatted, that is presented onto the output. So how do we do that is we give a formatting string, I'll come to that, and the parameter or argument that you want to print, just like we are printing initial here. So I'll print initial. And for characters or runes, the string formatter in Go is modulus C. So modulus C is for characters or runes. Then we have string formatters for string is basically modulus S. Modulus S is generally not used for string because by default it is modulus S. Anyways, I'll just write it modulus S. String for numbers it is modulus D. For booleans it is modulus T. Sorry, boolean. For floating point it is modulus F. And for characters or runes it is modulus C, just like we saw some time ago. Modulus C is for chars slash runes. Now let's see what happens when we try to run this program. Go run variable.go. Yeah, if you see here now, we have 74 printed from this line, and then we have the actual j printed from our printf statement. So that's how we print different variables with formats in Go. Now let's assume I wanted to print name as well, right? You won't see any difference, but just to show you, fmd.printf modulus s, as I mentioned, for string, and then your name. Now let's run this. Now if you see here, you can see that John and J, that is a name and initial, are printed together. Why is that? Is because print line, as it mentions ln, means every time something is printed, it will automatically append a new line character, that is slash n, to all of your strings, which is omitted by printf. So you will have to explicitly tell the printf to format your string to a new line. So to do that, you can just add a slash n towards the end of your print statement. Let's run the program again. Go run variable.go. And we have the output John and J. Okay. Now this was a basic introduction to all the different variables in Go. Different variables, sorry, different variable types, or maybe different data types, I should say. Different data types. There are more data types. As I mentioned earlier, I'll be covering them in a later point in time. Now let's look at something called as constant variables. Now constant variables is a bit not that they don't go well. It's basically an oxymoron. Constant is something that doesn't change and variable is that is something bound to change. Now What are constants in Go? Constants are also a type of variables which do not change its value during the entire lifetime of a program. Now, what is the lifetime of a program? Is basically from the start, that is from the main entry point, to the end, that is your last line of the main function. This is your lifetime of a function, or for at least for this particular Go program. Now, in this, if I try to change the name, for example, I'll get rid of all this for now. I will define a variable var name equal to John, and I will print this. Sorry, println and name. And what I'll do is I will change the value to Paul and then print it. Now what happens is when I try to run the program, go run variable.go, initially name is John, and then if you see here it becomes Paul. So this is basically the name variable is taking different value throughout the lifetime of this program. Now here if you see, this is basically your declaration and initialization of a variable. You are instructing the compiler that I'm declaring a variable called name and assigning it a value called John. And here, since the compiler already knows that there is a name variable, we are just assigning it a new value called Paul. And it is updated in the memory, and that's the reason you see Paul here. Now this is how a variable changes its value. Now let's see what happens in the case of a constant variable. To define a constant variable, there is a keyword called as const. Const name, or maybe I can take age for now since I already have name, equal to 25. And I'll print name and age. I'll print name and age. For now, let's just run this. So we have age printed. Now let's try to change the value of age to something else and then try to run the program. Now, if you see what happens here is the program does not run and it returns an error saying that cannot assign to age neither addressable nor a map index expression. I agree the error is a bit complex here, but what it actually means is that since age is a constant variable, you cannot change its value. That's what it means. So that's what a constant variable is, nothing much. That's all you need to know. And derived types cannot be constants. These are all basic data types that I was talking about. That is your string, int, bool, float, runes, right? Now this was a constant variable. Now there is one more, in variables there is a shorthand declaration to a variable as well, right? Now if you see this is a long expression to just declare a variable. Now there is something called as a shorthand notation where, let's say, I want to define marks this time, or maybe I want to define last name, colon equal to, maybe I can take some random name, Helen, right? So the last name is Helen. In this case, what happens is this again translate to the same meaning, that is where last name string equal to Helen. Is the same way, sorry, it's a different way to declare and initialize the same thing. For example, if I try to print the last name here, and let's get rid of this and then print. Yeah, you see, John, 25, and Helen, all three are printed, and there's no error since we are not reassigning any value to a constant value. To check, let's say last name is functioning as same as name. Now let's say I assign last name to Paul, Paul, and I try to print the same thing. Yeah, and I run it. So this is the same as this function, same as the normal variable, how you declare using var. So this is basically a shorthand notation. in Go. Now, so in this video, the last thing that I want to mention is something called as a statically typed language, right? Where each variable has a data type. For example, let's say I try to assign something, a value that is of a different data type. For example, here it was string, right? Now I'll try to assign something like maybe 25. What happens in this case? What happens in this case is you get a compile time error. What happens behind go run variable.go is that it first compiles your Go code to an executable, an exe format, especially for Windows, and then it executes it in a Windows format. I will cover that in detail in a separate video, how Go builds it and how what is the compilation process, how you can cross compile the Go code into different platforms, and what is actually cross compiling. I'll cover that in a later video. But for now, when you try to run the program, what happens is you see cannot use 25, untyped int constant as string value in assignment. It is pretty much clear saying that you cannot use an integer as a string value. So the type, whenever you're assigning a new value to a variable, the type of it should be maintained, which means if the variable is of type string, in the entire lifetime of the variable, you can assign only string values to it. You cannot assign any other data types. Okay. On that, I will take a leave. That's Cron Coder signing off. See you guys in the next one.